Some of you know that on Halloween, I got to go trick-or-treating with my sister and her family, which was so much fun. To see the kids, the whole street was filled with kids in tons of costumes, and the whole neighborhood had people sitting in their driveways with big buckets of candy for the kids. And if the parents were there, they might even have a special beverage for the parents. It was fun. And some of the houses, they just really decked out for Halloween. I mean, they were creepy, some of them. And I remember at one point in this moment of judgment in my heart, I looked at a house saying, what is their weird obsession with death? And I realized, oh, this is our fault. As Catholics, we're the ones who created All Saints' Day, All Souls' Day. We're the ones spending the month of November thinking about death. If Halloween has taken it too far, in a way, it was inspired by our month of November. It's within our tradition to spend the month of November praying for those who have died and spending a little more time thinking about our own death. And it's not because we want to be morbid. I think it's because it helps to keep everything else in context. It helps us to, keep things in their proper perspective while we're in this life. And I think our readings today kind of beautifully fit that theme, because we see in the first reading and the gospel a reflection on the resurrection of the dead. Now, you and I profess the resurrection of the dead, the resurrection of the body, every time we say the creed at Mass. You say it every time you say the creed praying the rosary. Maybe a little reminder on what that means. We know that when we die, our body goes into the ground, our soul goes to be with God. But that is not the end of the story. In a Christian understanding of things, we see this, Jesus teaches it, we see this in the book of Revelation, the dead will rise from the dead. That at the end of time, the dead will rise, that body will be transformed and glorified and reunited with our souls. So we don't spend eternity just being a ghost thinking about God. In a way, eternity is going to be bodily. We'll experience, we'll worship God with our bodies. That's maybe really hard to grasp, but that is the reality. That has been the faith of the church since Jesus talked about the resurrection of the dead. And we even see it hoped for in the Old Testament, and I think our first reading captured that really well. The first reading comes from a book that we practically never read at Sunday Mass. It just rarely comes up. It's from the second book of Maccabees. Now, Maccabees, you won't find it in a Protestant Bible, but you'll find it in Catholic and Orthodox Bibles. It covers a really important part of Israel's history that's also a really painful chapter in their history. It comes about 150 years before Christ. So this is, okay, in terms of the overall narrative of the Old Testament, this is pretty close to the time of Jesus. You're aware that in the time of Jesus, the Roman Empire is in charge, right? You know that from hearing about Caesar and the census and the Roman soldiers at the tomb and all that stuff. You know that from Jesus' life. Israel was under the thumb of this empire. But 150 years earlier, they were under the thumb of another empire, not the Romans yet. It's the Seleucid Empire in the book of Maccabees. And the Seleucids speak Greek, they love Greek philosophy, and they worship the Greek gods. And they are attempting to impose that Greek religion on everybody that is their subject. That includes all of God's people, the Jewish people, are being forced into really Jewish paganism. They're being forced to become Greek even in their worship. So their temple is desecrated. They're not allowed to celebrate Passover. They're not allowed to celebrate their Sabbath. They're being forced even to eat pork. You might remember that for the Jews, they're following God's command in Leviticus and Deuteronomy that they're not to consume pork. And sadly, as you read the books of Maccabees, there's a lot of people who just give in to that. They don't want to deal with the persecution. They don't want to deal with the torture. They don't want to deal with the death. So they just give in. They abandon worship of their God to save their lives. But the books of Maccabees also tell us about a lot of courageous people who will fight for their faith. Many courageous people who are willing to even die for their Jewish beliefs. And we see that in this reading today. This reading is a very truncated version of the longer chapter. The entire chapter tells us about 7 men who are all brothers, and they're being forced to either eat pork or be tortured and killed. Those are their choices. And eating pork is not just a symbol here. Like this is, to do so is to disobey God. And the Seleucids know that. They know that by forcing them to do this, they are rejecting their God and they're becoming pagan. And so these men refuse to do so. And it's a long narrative, but it's brother by brother. You watch them reject the pork and then be tortured in some really disgusting ways and be killed. And their mother is standing by watching the whole thing. That had to be just the hardest thing for a mother, to watch her 7 kids, one by one, be killed in that way. And you would think that maybe she would be tempted to try to talk them out of it, just maybe tell one of the brothers, just eat it, it's just pork, it'll be okay, God understands. She doesn't do that. Instead, when she needs to, she speaks up and she encourages them that this is okay. We have a God of the resurrection. We have a God who's going to reward us for our goodness. He's going to reward us for being faithful to him. So they all die as martyrs. It's a sad reality. But it's interesting because the entire reading is all about how they're able to face the torture, they're able to face death because of that faith in the life to come. When we lack the perspective that there's something beyond this life that is joyful and beautiful and a gift from God, if we lack that perspective, it might lock us into a possessiveness of this life. It creates this narrowness that we become consumed with making sure that this life just has to be perfect. I have to do everything I can to avoid suffering. I become terribly afraid of any illness or disease. It'd be easy to fall into despair. I could even become addicted to certain pleasures in life because this is all you get. Like, there's not going to be a happiness after this. This is the most happiness that you're going to ever get, so you better do everything you can to make this as suffering-free and as pleasurable as you can make it. It's a really sad reality. But it might mean that it makes us cowards at times when we need to stand up for difficult things. It might mean that we're afraid of persecution. We're even afraid of death. But if we have that perspective, that God has planned something incredible for us in the life after this, then it might give us the courage to choose the difficult things in life, to work on virtue. It might give us the courage to deal with persecution and, God forbid, even torture if we need to. It might even give us the courage to face death when that time comes, because we know that there's something good and beautiful to come. So in a way, the church is asking us this month to not just pray for those who have died, but to spend some time remembering our own death in order to keep everything in perspective. We ask God today for the grace to thank God for the gift of this life, as brief as it is, and to look forward to the life to come.